how to get out of fight, flight, freeze, fawn. So how do we get out of trauma mode? There was a time I had a situation where I was attacked by some people. They heard something about me and got the wrong impression. And I'm not like a street guy, but I found myself in this street situation where these people felt the need to physically assault me. And so I got away from the assailants enough to be able to call the police. And I dialed 911 on my phone. But the interesting thing that happened, and by the way, I was fine and everything, but what happened with the phone is that after you dial 911, it puts the phone in an emergency mode, and it kind of locks out other features to preserve the battery to the phone. And so now your phone can only do limited functions until you satisfy the fact that whatever the emergency was is past. And so the phone goes into an emergency mode when you dial 911, which is a good feature to channel all the energy resources toward the very important situation that you're facing. Likewise, your brain has an emergency mode, or what I call trauma mode. So when you experience trauma, you go into a different mode of thinking in the brain, especially if it's long-term repeated trauma, as we call it, complex trauma. That's long-term repeated traumatic experiences, like a prisoner of war or a child that grows up in an unpredictable environment, or with caregivers that are emotionally abusive or emotionally neglectful. Whatever it is, the child is being traumatized, it changes the brain. So they still have the same brain matter, but what happens now is they go into trauma mode, which locks out other parts of the brain and diverts energy toward the amygdala. We need all the energy to be in the amygdala when we're in trauma mode, because that's what's going to help us to stay safe in an actual emergency. The amygdala has the connection to the emotional self, so it can engage your fight, your flight, your freeze, and your fawn. Okay, again, it's connected to the emotions. The emotions are immediate and automatic, and they're based on the perceptions of the subconscious mind. So when you're in trauma mode, your brain says, let's lock all the conscious reasoning and memory and all that stuff out, and let's focus on keeping her safe by engaging fight, flight, freeze, fawn, automated responses to whatever we face. Automated responses. It takes a snapshot of what was around you, who the people were, what they were like, the sights, the smells, the sounds. And then that way it records them in a file we'll call triggers. And that way, whenever you see something like that, or hear something like that, or smell something like that again, it's a trigger. And that puts you back into flight, fight, freeze, or fawn to give you a way to respond to these situations. Now, you've heard of these 4 F's: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn response are trauma responses that allow us to have an immediate automated way of handling actual emergency situations. It allows us to have immediate automated way of handling emergency situations. So that's our trauma response. So fight response, freeze response, flight response, and fawn response are appropriate for actual emergency situations. So, for instance, I saw on social media a bear just came into the picnic like Yogi or something. He just came up on the table, and then he started eating the food that the picnickers had out for themselves, and the picnickers had to respond to this bear. Now, you have a few different options for how to respond in an emergency situation: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, right? And so in this case, they chose freeze response, which You have to look it up for yourself, but I do believe that's what experts recommend when it comes to a bear, because you cannot outrun them. So flight response would not be appropriate, and you cannot outfight them usually, because so therefore fight response would not be the most appropriate response when being attacked by a bear, or being not attacked, but encountering a bear. And so they encountered the bear, and the bear was right there, like just like camera to me. I mean, it was up on the table. And so they just froze and they just sat there like this. And the bear was right there on the table. They didn't move a muscle. And they used freeze response. And it was really chilling to watch this, because, you know, at any time this bear could do anything, but because they were utilizing the proper trauma response, they were able to survive the situation. And it did have a happy ending. And the bear went away after the bear ate all their food. And so, as I'm sure they're not happy their food was eaten, I know they're absolutely thrilled that they did whatever they needed to do to make sure they survived that situation. So, when we respond to situations in fight, flight, freeze, fawn, we're responding in trauma mode. Sometimes it's adaptive, but most of the time it's inappropriate. And this is what you must understand. So if you have borderline personality disorder or you have CPTSD, what you find yourself doing is responding in flight, fight, freeze, and fawn for everyday life situations. You're treating everyday life situations as if they're a crisis. And that's the way a person who is traumatized tends to start to view things. When you have complex post-traumatic stress disorder or borderline personality disorder, now almost everything is a crisis. So, oh no, my employee left and now I need to hire a new employee. That's a crisis. Even if you know in advance that you need to hire this new employee, it still feels like a crisis. Oh no, I need to transfer funds from one account to another. Oh no, my lease is expired. These are kind of like everyday situations. And although they can be a bit distressing, if we don't have the skills, the life skills to deal with them properly in a healed response, then we resort back to traumatized response. So let me give you an exact example of this. Think about a work situation. So in a work situation, someone would be responding in fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Let's say if they encountered a injustice at work. And so someone else doesn't get as much work as you get. Your boss gives you more work. And so this is an everyday life situation. It's not an actual emergency. But a trauma survivor will view it as a crisis, and they will become dysregulated and won't know what to do. As a result, they'll go to fight response. The fight response would be becoming argumentative, directly addressing the boss in a confrontational manner, blaming, saying that this is discrimination, viewing themselves as a victim and lashing out as a result. Maybe they would even stubbornly refuse to do any work as a act of rebellion. That would be fight response to the situation of a simple work injustice. You seemingly are getting more work than other people. The flight response in this scenario would be you're avoiding all confrontation, and you're trying to go into perfectionism. So you're going to try to do even more work and work even harder, or do it to higher quality so that you're not treated like that again. But of course, that would just perpetuate the cycle. So it's not an adaptive way to respond in this situation. Or you might immediately decide to quit. That is also flight response. What? This is injustice. I'm out of here. And then all of a sudden you're gone. And everyone's like, why did you quit your job? They were just giving me too much. And you quit your job because they gave you a lot of work. Like, it's work, you know? And so people would feel that your response is disproportionate, and that's trauma response. So you've gone into flight. Freeze response is you feel paralyzed, unable to take any action in the face of this injustice. And so you just stay silent. You don't express any concerns. You just stay status quo. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to do anything, right? And then there's fawn response, And fawn response is, I'm not just not going to rock the boat, I'm going to calm the sea. And so you're trying to please and appease your bosses, your superiors, your coworkers, and you're taking on more than your fair share, which again leads to more abuse. All of these actually invoke more abuse. If you're too confrontational, you're going to get more of the what you don't like, which is all of this confrontation or being singled out. When you're running away or you're going into perfectionism, you're getting used again and again and again. If you're going into fawn response, you're being this overachiever, a people pleaser, then you're getting abused again and again. If you're going into freeze response, you're not doing anything, it's the status quo, you're going to keep getting abused. So you can see that trauma response doesn't work for the everyday situation. So what does work? Well, that's what I'm going to present to you today. But let me give you another example of this, because some of us don't have jobs. Let's say you're a domestic person, you're at home. Let's say you get in a fight with your boyfriend. It's an everyday situation. Your boyfriend expresses something in a mean, harsh way, or you don't like his attitude. And fight response, you will become very boisterous, very loud, and you'll yell something at him that is meant to hurt him. Why? Because you feel hurt, or you feel upset, or you don't know how you feel. And so you lash out as a response. You may even become violent. And it's not because you're an evil person, it's because you're a traumatized person. A trauma survivor may also go into flight response, which is, you know what, I'm out of here. Okay, this is just a normal discussion. The boyfriend might have said something inappropriate, but a trauma survivor will find themselves out on the street crying in their slippers and robe, walking the streets. One woman said when she was having a problem with her family, she went, packed the car, threw all her stuff in the car, and just started driving. She didn't know where she was going, though. Where am I going? I don't know. I don't have a plan. I don't have a place that I'm going. I'm just running away. But the thing is, she was in her 40s, right? She's not a child. So what are we running away to, right? There's a lack of logic, a lack of thinking it out, because it's trauma response. This is very common for trauma survivors. You can find yourself going into fawn response. The fawn response is then, I'm going to appease my boyfriend and try to please the boyfriend to avoid all conflict and suppress my needs, suppress my opinions, suppress my feelings. I'm going to apologize excessively. I'm sorry, and try to maintain harmony and just do everything. And now we're in the fawn response, right? Freeze response, becoming silent and unresponsive during the argument. Dissociating, you're just looking like this. That's freeze response in an argument. It's not adaptive. None of these responses are adaptive for an everyday life situation, like a disagreement with a boyfriend. So you're getting the picture, right? Or what if you have a situation like a lease that is coming expired? So your apartment lease is coming expired. Someone who's not a trauma survivor sees this as maybe an opportunity to move, maybe an opportunity to renew their lease. They're weighing out their options as they come close to the expiration date. A trauma survivor feels like, oh my God, I could become homeless. This is the worst case scenario. I don't know what I'm going to do. They feel this is a crisis. They feel it's a crisis, even though they know ahead of time. They know months, weeks in advance. They're going at this like it's a crisis. And so their brain is in trauma mode. So they go, fight, refuse to leave, and they start blaming the landlord and starting a big fight over it. Or flight. They feel overwhelmed by the prospect of having to find a new place, so they start avoiding the situation. They start distracting themselves with everything else. They procrastinate the search, they delay the decisions, and they start relying on others to handle the process, which is akin to their freeze response, which is going to be just feeling too paralyzed or stressed to do anything. And once again, they're not finding a new place to live or taking action to renew their lease. And so they're not decisive. Or the fawn response, which in this case would be seeking approval and reassurance from others. What do you guys think I should do? What can you guys validate my decisions? Can you validate my choices? I'm just gonna rely heavily on others. Mom, Dad, can you help me? And now they're in fawn response to the situation, right? So what is the answer to all of this? Let me share my screen with you. to help you to see what we can actually do in these situations. So here's the matrix of the trauma response. We have fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, right? Now, what we need to do, because all of these are extremes, we don't want to respond in extremes anymore. So we need to get out of trauma mode. The first way to break out of trauma mode is to pause. So you can use STOP, the acronym STOP, S-T-O-P. Be still, be thoughtful, be observant, and be patient. This allows you to engage the other parts of your brain. Breathing, patience, time to think, meditation allows you to engage the other parts of your brain. A healed person is not staying in the trauma mind. The healed person is utilizing their logical mind, their cerebral cortex. So I introduced to you the 4 Ds of the healed of the healed response. These are the 4 Ds of the healed response. As you notice, they're connected to a trauma response because the trauma response is the extreme version of the 4 Ds. These 4 Ds are life skills. Healed responses is life skills that everyone needs to learn. And ideally, your parents would have helped you to learn this. But for most of us, that wasn't the case because they're too busy abusing, neglecting, living their own life, or going through their own issues and problems. And they didn't teach us the skills, the life skills, the 4 Ds. You are supposed to respond to everything in this. You are never supposed to respond to anything in fight, flight, freeze, fawn, unless it is an emergency. Does that make sense? You are never supposed to respond to anything in fight, flight, freeze, or fawn unless it is an emergency, life or death situation. So we're supposed to handle everything in discussion, deliberation, deference, or disconnection. Discussion, deliberation, deference, or disconnection. So let me explain to you how these things work, okay? Instead of fighting, a healed response is to discuss. So picture work. You're facing the injustice. You're getting too much work. Your coworkers don't get as much work. So a healed person may utilize the discussion technique, which is to calmly approach the boss, ask for a meeting, and then address their concerns with the boss. They're going to calmly address their concerns and say, hey, I notice I've been getting a lot of work. I'm not sure if I'm getting picked on for any particular reason, but it doesn't seem to be as much work as my coworkers who have the same position. And I'm wondering, is that my imagination or is there some basis to that? Can you help me out to understand? And they say, you know what, Roman? You're my best worker. And the reality is I don't feel like I can trust them. That's why I'm coming to you. But I apologize. And if it's too much, I'd be glad to take some of it off of your plate. Do you see that? It's healed response. And it's effective to actually get something done. On the other hand, we have deliberation. Deliberation is your ability to ponder something and think on it, have a discussion within yourself, to deliberate, to speak to yourself about it, to analyze the options at your disposal, and then to decide. Deliberation is a life skill. It is a healed response to a situation that feels like a crisis. So imagine this person deliberates instead of freezing, which would be the extreme response. They actually take some time and they meditate. And they ask themselves, hey, is what I'm going through actually an injustice, or am I just imagining this? What is the evidence? Let me take some documentation down. Let me write some notes. Let me write out my thoughts. Let me regulate whatever emotions I'm feeling. Let me use the JOT method. Let me remember to stop, to be still, thoughtful, observant, and patient. Deliberation allows us to analyze things and to get into our logical mind. Deliberation is a life skill and is a healed trauma response or a healed response to everyday life situations that can come up. On the bottom, we have deference. Deference is the less extreme to the trauma response fawning. Instead of people pleasing, someone who has healthy levels of deference understands how to allow other people to have their opinions, to have their way sometimes. They don't mind deferring to someone else's authority or judgment when it's appropriate. But they don't lose sight of their own authority and their own judgment in the process. They don't lose sight of their own emotions. Deference is a deliberate decision to defer to someone else. It's a deliberate decision to defer and say, you know what? You're the boss. You make the decision. Or, you know what, babe? It's okay. You can decide on what kind of curtains we buy. So imagine in this situation with the boss having a healthy level of deference is showing that respect to the boss. So you're not just going and confronting him and fighting him in a disrespectful manner, but you're saying, hey, you know, as you're approaching him in this discussion, you have a proper level of deference. You're saying, hey, you know, I noticed that you've been giving me more. Now, perhaps there's a reason for that deference, and I'm happy to be working here, and I want to make sure I'm doing the best that I can for this team, for this company. I'm grateful for the position, proper level of deference in the discussion, right? All of these balance each other out. Balance is healing. These are healed responses to everyday life situations, even if it feels a bit like a crisis at first. The other extremely important skill is disconnection. Disconnection is the life skill of being able to remove yourself from the situation or remove your emotions from the situation. Yes, it is to disconnect. When you're going through situations in life, running away is not always the answer. But we do need to know that we have the option of walking away. So when you're talking to your boss, you're keeping in mind that you have the option to disconnect and to walk away, to take your skills, your talents, your abilities to another company. Maintaining this allows you to negotiate from a stronger position. Maintaining your ability to disconnect allows you to negotiate from a stronger position. Also, disconnection has to do with removing your feelings from the situation. So in the situation with the boss giving too much work to me and I feel like it's an injustice, instead of saying, well, maybe it's racial, maybe it's according to my gender, I can utilize my skills of disconnection and say, you know what, maybe it has nothing to do with me. Maybe it's not my fault. Maybe I don't have to blame myself. In fact, I choose not to. And instead, I choose to disconnect my emotions from this and just look at this from a logical standpoint. So therefore, our disconnection will now complement our deliberation. These balance each other. And so as we're thinking and we're pondering, well, okay, it could be that this is a prejudice, racial, or a gender-based discrimination. But as I deliberate and I disconnect my emotions from it, it could be also that this person just finds me to be more useful or finds me to be a very good person that they can rely on. And so as we disconnect our emotions, it allows us to view this from a balanced standpoint. These are the life skills that we need to build. So let's see how you do on this one. Let's say you're in a fight with your significant other. Let's go back to that example. You're in a fight with your significant other. It's not bad. It just, they said something that kind of triggered you. Okay. So remember, fight, flight, freeze is taking those extreme responses, but now we're going to get into the less extreme, balanced way of handling the situation. So if we employ the skills of discussion to our boyfriend saying something that seemed insensitive, They might say, babe, can I talk to you? I need to express to you that I appreciate all the hard work that you do for this family. And I can appreciate your position and why you might have been upset. But what you said to me felt a little bit insensitive and it hurt my feelings. So now we're able to have that discussion with the proper level of deference. These are life skills. And they bring you out of the trauma response and allow you to handle a situation instead of just survive it. And now with this calm discussion, having the discussion skills, pulling out a notebook, yes, in a domestic relationship, pulling out a notebook and a pen and paper for your discussion so that you can listen and not interrupt, and you can write down your thoughts. These are skills of discussion. Pull out your notebook, write down your thoughts, talk from the notebook, have the purpose of the discussion at the top of the page so you stay on topic. Skills of discussion. These are skills of assertiveness. The ability to go in and speak about what the issue is until we reach a solution, a conclusion to the matter. Allowing the other person to talk when necessary, knowing when to defer to them and allow them to have their point for this particular discussion. These are the life skills. On the other hand, we have healthy disconnection. So imagine you've gotten into an argument with your boyfriend, or he said something to you that's insensitive. Instead of running away and running out of the house and running out and being tearful in your slippers and robe on the street, healthy disconnection is to say, okay, well, first of all, I have the ability to leave at any time. I maintain that ability. Now I can negotiate from a place of personal power. Second of all, I can disconnect my feelings for a moment from what just happened. So let me disconnect my feelings from what just happened so that I can analyze it and deliberate on this effectively. And so when we remove our feelings, we analyze it. Well, if the boyfriend said something harsh, maybe he felt triggered, or maybe he didn't mean it. And now we're able to have healthy deliberation on this scenario. Maybe he did it for this, maybe he did it for that. I don't ultimately know because I am not him. This connection means we recognize that his feelings aren't our feelings. So just because he became upset and he couldn't regulate his emotions has nothing to do with me. He's upset, not me. I'm not upset. I feel fine. So he's upset about something. That's healthy disconnection. Now it allows us to go in and handle this situation from the standpoint of personal power. Is this making sense? Okay, let's take one last example. How can you do this if your lease is coming due? Now you're faced with the option of either renewing the lease or finding a new place to live. Well, if we're balanced with a healthy level of deliberation, we weigh out our options and then we decide one way or another what we will do. Instead of starting an unnecessary legal battle, we will defer to the authority of the landlord, recognize that they own this property and we don't. We will defer to the binding agreement, the lease, and recognize that if we don't sign another one, we don't have a right to stay, right? We will reach out to the landlord if necessary or our lawyer to get legal counsel and advice or to discuss with the landlord if an extension is possible, if necessary, to find out what our options are. Ultimately, we will recognize our ability to take our ball and go home. More so, we will disconnect emotionally from the scenario. Just because my lease is coming due doesn't mean I have to be upset. Doesn't mean I have to cry or be afraid. Instead of being in flight mode, oh my God, if I don't do something, I'm going to end up being homeless. That's catastrophizing. It's cognitive distortion. We stay disconnected emotionally and say, well, whatever the case is, I'm just going to do what's logical, not what's emotional. And so these are the 4 Ds. So hopefully you took notes. And this is absolutely rewiring your brain. Yes. Hopefully you took notes on this. You got to start thinking with every situation from here on out, how to utilize the 4 Ds of the healed response. The 4 Ds of the healed response.